Conor McGregor is returning to the octagon, and he is doing so against probably, almost certainly, the current number one fighter in the most deep, dangerous, exciting division in the UFC. I mean, I've said you can't really bottle success in the UFC before, but this is one of those exceptions. This is absolutely a fascinating, exciting matchup, and I cannot wait for it. There's so much to talk about here. This, from the perspective of McGregor's chances and how this matchup is different or the same to some of his previous bookings, the fact that this is a rematch, Dustin Poirier, a fighter who has never or hasn't quite been able to take that step to the champion before. There's mental questions, there are physical questions. So let's start off with the fact that this is a rematch. 6 years ago, these two fought at featherweight while McGregor was on his legendary run through the division, and this win has aged very well for him due to the success Dustin Poirier has enjoyed after, though he was already quite successful at featherweight. I mean, you look back at McGregor's run and names like Diego Brandao and Dennis Seaver, you're like, but Dustin Poirier is one of those names that really cements that run as legendary. So the fight was about a little over 90 seconds the first time, and here's what I saw. McGregor got the pressure off early. He opened with two fascinating kicks, a hook kick to get Poirier backing up, and then a spinning body kick that landed quite nicely and got Poirier on the back foot. And that spinning body kick to me is especially important because southpaw versus southpaw, McGregor has to figure out a way to land the power a little different. I mean, his best punch is that left straight power shot, but it doesn't land quite as easily. It doesn't get set up quite as cleanly against a southpaw, because Poirier is more comfortable in that defensive stance and he's able to back away from the power on his power foot. But if you spin with your back power leg towards that makes the southpaw fighter unable to back in that direction. So that kick was really important. And then Poirier's offense, I mean, he's talked about his head wasn't in the right place for that fight. He wasn't the mature fighter he is now. He wanted to just hurt McGregor because he was so fed up and furious with his antics. And you saw that. He was really lunging in and swinging. He wasn't able to set up the power shots with a jab and get McGregor. He'd see an opening, lunge in, just touch. He threw leg kicks to try and, which is a good move against McGregor's power stance, or sorry, karate power stance with wide base, but he wasn't at the right distance for setting those up, so he was just kind of touching them with those leg kicks. I'd like to see him go to the power more, but we'll get there when we get there. So Poirier out of range, lunging a little too far in, and then McGregor started touching and feinting with straights, especially a jab. And I noticed he kind of landed the same shot 3 times. So maybe 1 minute in, he was using his right power jab, set it up. He got Poirier going with a very straight shell, which he then started landing the left hook around. So the first time he just touched him with it, but it was a very clean path of entry and went right where he wanted to. And then you saw 20-30 seconds later, he landed the same punch again, and this time he staggered Poirier. You saw Poirier wobble, you saw him backing up, and then 10 seconds later, McGregor backs him into the cage. He goes again with the jab, gets Poirier ducking and doing some confused head movement where you can tell he wants to lean out to his power side away from McGregor's power. But I think the spinning threat, which McGregor presented 3 or 4 more times, though it never landed quite as cleanly as that first body kick, dissuaded him. He wants to go one way. He reconsiders and then just leaves his head kind of in no man's land in the middle, and the third left hook lands and just drops Poirier, and that's all she wrote. I mean, the other thing is McGregor had the touch of death at featherweight. He had such terrifying power that it just, I mean, you don't see many fighters not get touched at all inside the first round, and it seems like that's all he really had to do, just touch you, and then you were going to crumble. Like that shot, it most fighters can't knock a guy out with the opportunity that Dustin Poirier presented in that fight, but McGregor could. You see Poirier's head in no man's land, and you see McGregor time and wind up with full velocity, full momentum, but just glances. I had to watch the replay like 10 times before I figured out how and where the shot landed, because it almost looks like it missed. So moving on to the current match, that is my first big question. Does McGregor's power carry at lightweight the same way it did at featherweight all those years back? And we're going to learn that because it's all of McGregor's fights that haven't been at featherweight. It's really hard to tell. You've got Alvarez, you've got Khabib, and you've got Diaz. So Diaz, and you've got Cowboy. So Diaz, I mean, the man's only been knocked out once. He has, and that knockout damaged the guy's shin more than it damaged Diaz's chin. Adamantium chin, you can't really take, and that fight was at welterweight. You can't really take much. Khabib obviously did not give McGregor the chance to land until his arms were full of blood from all the grappling. So didn't get a good preview. Cowboy, that wasn't really the power in the hands that got the knockout. It was the power in the mental ferocity that just absolutely overwhelmed and blistered poor Cowboy, who was regretting it, I think, the moment he started making the walk. And then Eddie Alvarez, which is, if you're a McGregor fan, the one you take the most hope from, because McGregor showed good power in that fight, which was at lightweight. The only, I guess, the counter argument to that is that, much like the Cowboy fight, Eddie Alvarez was not mentally there. McGregor dropped him in the first like 10, 15, 20 seconds, and that shows he has power, but it wasn't like the same as the Jose Aldo or the Dustin Poirier drops where that instantly led to a finish, which maybe you say, okay, so a little less power. And then from there, Alvarez was just overwhelmed, unsettled, never got back in, and McGregor put on an absolute clinic against a bewildered man. So, I mean, maybe we see that again. Maybe we see that same ferocity. We saw him pull out against Cowboy and landing quick, landing hard. You don't have to end it. You just have to unsettle Poirier, and then the finish will come. But that is a huge question for me. I think everyone knows this, when McGregor lands, because it really is when, not if, what's the reaction? I'll get to some of Poirier's other fights in a sec, but he has shown a hell of a chin in them. He hasn't been finished in a long time. I think Michael Johnson was the last guy to stop him by like TKO knockout. So all Poirier has to ask of his chin is like, let me weather a couple shots, and then it's a fight. But if the touch of death carries to lightweight, then it's probably not much of a fight. Then the other question for McGregor is cardio. It's followed him his whole career, or at least since that first Diaz fight. And you can tell in the press conference, in the questions, he's frustrated by it, but he always has been. I mean, his fast program got launched like years and years and years ago. And like it started in the first Diaz fight, but the second Diaz fight cemented it. You saw him like gassing after two and having to run away from Diaz and catch a second win, which Nate Diaz is not an elite fighter. I'm sorry I said it, but he's not the kind of guy who exploits. He's not like a shark with blood in the water, the way a guy like Dustin Poirier, I think, will be, the way a guy like Jorge Masvidal would be, the way like Habib is, the way Justin Gaethje is. There are fighters who, if you run away like that, will make you pay. And Nate Diaz just wants to stand and bang. So that fight showed me cardio issues. The Floyd Mayweather fight showed me cardio issues, and the Khabib fight showed me cardio issues. So McGregor's saying it's a non-issue. I say no. It is been consistent throughout his career that after 2 rounds, he's not out. I mean, he showed in the second Diaz fight he can catch a second wind, but he needed a lot of break and breathing time to do that, and I don't think he will get that against Dustin Poirier if he gasses similarly. I mentioned the kicks in the first fight that set up the power and like let McGregor land the shots he needed to land to get the knockout. Those type of kicks are very exhausting, and he kind of learned in the first Diaz fight not to throw them so willy-nilly. So I am curious if he goes back to what worked in using like the fancy technical showboating kickboxing, which is not effective in like, I'm going to knock you out with one of these kicks, but is effective in I can set up my power with these kicks, or if he goes a little more traditional. Then for Dustin Poirier, how are you going to defend yourself? You're coming off a fight of the year candidate, which was fight of the year because you got lit up in the first 2 rounds. Dan Hooker landed a shit ton of jabs, some nice leg kicks, and a couple devastating knees. Now, I guess there's two ways to look at this, because Dan Hooker has a lot of first round finishes over some fairly tough guys. So maybe you say, hey, the chin held up against like a strong first round finisher, and that's encouraging for Poirier. Or maybe you say, slow starter, that's got you into trouble against Hooker, that's going to finish you against McGregor. It's the range is different. I mean, Dan Hooker has which I'll get to on the next fight more, but like a phenomenal jab. And that's, I think, orthodox southpaw, not something Poirier has had to deal with too much in his career, like an orthodox fighter who is really good at jabbing southpaws. And so a lot of the significant strikes were like power jabs from Hooker, which is going to be different against McGregor. I know John Kavanagh was kind of teasing on Ariel Helwani's show about McGregor practicing orthodox, and then going, oops, edit that out. So maybe we'll see some orthodox McGregor. I'm not sure. But the range of Hooker was a problem, and McGregor is similar, not in his reach or his height, but just his ability to keep you at the range he wants you, and then like get his extension perfect for like the connecting distance. So there's two things you can do. You can keep it farther out or closer in. You keep it farther out, and it gives McGregor the opportunity to use that fancy kickboxing we talked about, and then like set up other shots. So head on a swivel, constant footwork to not let your back get against the cage can work well there. You go in, you clinch, you try and get some blood rush into his arms to take away the power. Maybe you can even like take him down and make it a bit of a grapple fest, but you have to worry about that left hand counter closing the distance. In the Cowboy fight, that was kind of right off the bat, I knew it was a non-fight because Cowboy had the opportunity for that takedown and he just wilted on it right away. I don't really expect Poirier to pass up the same chance. I mean, Cowboy, even before that fight, was saying, like, yeah, I want to kickbox with this guy. I don't really want to win through grappling. That was a silly approach to take. And I, if you listen to what Poirier is saying, he's saying, like, I see a lot of paths to victory for myself through decision, through submission, through knockout. So I expect him to take every advantage he has. And I mean, he showed he was willing to do that in the Max Holloway fight, where he like emptied the gas tank on Max Holloway's face and then had to deal with a guy who was still standing, still coming after him. And he had to dig deep and use a lot of clinch work. So reverse of that might come in handy for Poirier. Get McGregor against the fence early, get his arms tired. Everyone knows this. McGregor knows this. So I'm sure he'll be looking sharp on the counters anytime Poirier gets in close range. But it will be interesting to see how much, especially in the first round, he looks to not let McGregor fight his fight. What else have we got? In terms of, I guess I can bring it over to you for a sec and maybe catch my breath a little. You were talking about the press conference when we started it up. Is that what's like, how much is this fight on your radar? And like, is that the biggest part? Is there anything else?
Yeah, it's interesting. I probably, yeah, I don't get much on my feed, but when I do, it's usually Conor McGregor. Like, it's the Sports Center posting his top like trash talking moments, or it's the Sports Center posting his explosion at a press conference. And so that is kind of the content that I've got to see this week. And I think it was Conor is donating to Dustin's charity, and I think Dustin has a hot sauce line, or Conor has a hot sauce line, and they're like trying to work on that together. It's great. I love that they're like being gentlemen, but it's a different thing than I've come to expect from Conor. I'm used to him throwing chairs at buses and uh, like just losing his mind and stealing belts and throwing water bottles and all that stuff. And so it's definitely a more mature Conor, and uh, I think it's everyone's still hyping him up to being this like crazy guy, which he will be when he enters the ring. But it seems like he's taking a much more methodical approach to this fight than he has previously.
Yeah, I mean, I think the easiest way to think of it is he he had nothing he had nothing to his name and everything to prove back in the day, whereas now there is so much to his name, and as much as he still has to prove and wants to prove, it it's less of the chip on the shoulder is there, but just the maturity. He's seen where that can lead with all the Khabib stuff that's gone on over the years, and he's a father. He's had more than enough bad PR to last a lifetime. So there, yeah, the shit stirring. And there's even, man, the Aldo thing will forever be so frustrating as like an Aldo fan. Just like what would have happened if Aldo hadn't been so furious and just looking to take McGregor's head off. I mean, I, you can argue both ways, and it might be a bit of a silly question, but there are lots of people who feel like half of McGregor's game is just his shit talking, and like the same with Eddie Alvarez. Like he was same with, or not same with, some when guys are defeated before they even step in the cage, it's less, I guess, less praiseworthy to beat them, which is kind of the basis of that legendary Nate Diaz call out. But then he also just doesn't need to. Like all that pressure is still very much apparent as it was against Cowboy Cerrone, and McGregor didn't need to shit talk at all. So the one thing that has carried over is the confidence. You listen to him speak, and he still has that absolute belief in himself. He's predicting a 60-second finish over Dustin Poirier. So it's still the same confident, I believe in myself, I can knock anybody out, Conor McGregor. It's just he's going to shake your hand before he knocks you out, not spit in your face. That I did kind of want to talk about the where they're both at mentally a little, but I mean they're both dads. They've both been in world title matches. They've both been there, done that, and like seen kind of the highs and lows and what's worthwhile, what's not worthwhile about shit talking. They both have a lot of mutual respect, so it's pretty similar. They're both, I mean, Dustin's pretty candid about his weaknesses, where he's lost, why he's lost, not having been good enough in the past, and like how much this means to him. McGregor is still a little more like confident, not owning up to his defeats as much, but you can't, like, McGregor's just never given you anything that like justifies questioning where his head is at. I do wonder if there's a point of being spread too thin for him, or he's just so good at compartmentalizing. I mean, he's talking about like welterweight still. He's talking about a run through the lightweight division. He's talking about Khabib saying like our war is not over, but he's also saying like I don't think, like I think he's too scared and gonna run. So he's giving a bit of a bipolar take on that. He's talking about like lightweight gold. And then like he's talking about boxing Manny Pacquiao a little as like that's in the works. We're hearing offers. And he's obviously a businessman. So maybe, I mean, like I said, he's given nothing to ever suggest that the mental game isn't there. His coaches and all are obviously saying like best he's ever looked. He's giving it his all. I do wonder if there's a point of spreading himself too thin, but nothing really to point to indicate that yet. The last thing I wanted to say was something I find interesting is both fighters have kind of had the last or had the bout they're predicting for this one in their last fight. So McGregor said, I think this is going to be a 60-second or less knockout for me, which is exactly what he just did to Cowboy Cerrone. And Dan Hooker is saying, I hope this is going to be a war that comes down to the ability to like, who wants it more, who's willing to bleed more, who's willing to bite down more and go forward and earn it, which is exactly what he had against Dan Hooker, having to lose the first 2 rounds, weather a bit of a beating, but like hang in there and take the next 3 and just kind of wilt the other guy through like better cardio, the ability to pressure forward and never give up. So I just find that kind of interesting that both are looking to replicate essentially exactly what they did last. And yeah, I think that is everything I wanted to cover. I still don't feel like it's out of my system, and I could talk about this fight for another hour, but there are other fights to get to, so it's time to move on a little.